The first attempt to utilize ArkAngel resulted in a conflict that might have well produced World War III. The night before the full activation of the collider, the professor was approached by an agent working for Israeli intelligence. The professor was alerted that the project was infiltrated by agents sympathetic to the cause of radical Islam. It would appear that their ideology obscured their ability to interpret history. On December 21, 2012, it was a historical fact that Damascus was bombed by Israel in the fall of 2011. The destruction of the most ancient occupied city in the world was a countermeasure following a failed nuclear attack against the Jewish state of Israel. The Islamic Brotherhood believed that the transfer of knowledge could change the past. What they could not know was that someone was watching the switchboard. With the recent toppling of Egypt, Libya, and the unification of Hamas and the Fatah, the long-awaited official reign on 12/12/21 at 11:11 hours. This would all be accomplished in less than 10 seconds, as the highly classified surface-to-air missile sites surrounding Israel would be sent back through time. In the minds of the Islamic Brotherhood, the alleged capture and assassination of bin Laden gave strong indication that the West was about to intervene, securing more real estate and Pakistan's nuclear stockpile. They were assured that the assassination of bin Laden was a false flag operation. It was well known within circles of the jihad that their glorious leader died 8 years ago from a pulmonary embolism. In the minds of these radical Shiites, the only thing standing between them and the restoration of the rule of Islam was Israel. It was just a matter of time before Pakistan would fall into the hands of the West. Clearly, Allah had placed his mighty sword within their reach. Someone conveniently left the henhouse door unguarded. By the time the theft of the Garuka 2 nukes was recognized, Israel would be in ashes. Just in case they were unsuccessful, which was very unlikely, the Chinese had contributed one of their new hypersonic missiles. The launch platform was generously provided by Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela. A fuel tanker was anchored 50 miles offshore, waiting for the signal to launch, and would finish off the rest of the Western infidels. In the minds of the saboteurs, the only reason that they had lost the war in the first place was poor intelligence. The transmission provided by ArkAngel would assure the destruction of Israel and bring the West to their knees. These physicists would have no way of knowing that they would fall on the very sword that they had fashioned against their sworn enemy. Quantum scientists were asserting that time is not linear, purporting that alternate time streams could be created. It would appear that science and religion had the same motive. Much as I have noted, mankind intuitively understands that the time of reckoning is close at hand. In spite of their efforts, God has already written the conclusion on human history. No one will escape his judgment. The professor's theoretical hypothesis did not support the concept of multiple time streams. As you will come to understand, the professor did suggest that there were alternate dimensions in time-space. Of course, the Bible has asserted this for thousands of years. God dwells in accessible light. The data strand that was marked for the professor's prototype had been run in several lab simulations. The chief focus revolved around managing potential threats of encountering a power surge that would be produced by the solar flare that ArkAngel was about to harness. There were security measures taken to prevent hacking from the outside, but little to no measures were arranged to prevent sabotage from within. Since the 2011 version of the professor's device was connected to the internet, the possibility of directing another data strand to assets in Iran were possible. The information would contain its own form of verification that would convince their leadership in the caliphate that the communication was genuine. The president of Syria would implement the attack. This timely heads-up would give the Brotherhood first strike capability, eliminating interference from the United States or Europe. It was clear that the great American Satan and their allies in NATO had their own agenda. It was not include the agenda of radical Islam. When the professor was informed of this imminent threat against Israel, his response was one of horror and bewilderment. The agent carefully tracked the professor's eyes and the pregnant silence that followed. The physicist eventually found his tongue and made his confession. He went on to describe an anomaly that occurred at his research lab shortly before the war between Israel and the recently formed coalition of Arab nations. He received a short burst transmission from someone claiming to be himself, but the exchange was garbled and was terminated in less than 10 seconds. Following the event, the major power grid shut down. There were pre-existing questions and concerns that the professor had about manipulating time, but this would not discourage him. In fact, this did inspire him to set up a security precaution for just such an occasion. Within a few hours, unbeknownst to the saboteurs, the professor was able to alter the coordinates leading this recently formed coalition forces to release their payload on less populated civilian targets. Of course, this would alert the Israeli Air Force, and 3 squadrons were scrambled. Their well-rehearsed drills were about to pay off. The coalition MiG fighters were down before they could squeeze out even one of their nuclear ordinances. What the SAM missile sites failed to finish off, the F-16s made easy work of. The deadly hypersonic 100-megaton cruise missile was launched, burning its path to Jerusalem. Allah's messenger would rain down instant death on Jew, Arab, and Christian alike. While the Israeli Air Force was able to intercept this missile, the nuclear payload did, however, discharge over 2 fortified cities. The release of these materials produced mass civilian casualties. Given the ongoing threat of radical Islam and the devastation of 2 major population centers, immediate aggressive action was taken. Had the full-scale attack been successful, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv would be in ruins. A small squadron of C-130s was loaded with multiple MOP devices, or mass ordnance penetrators, with the equivalent of 30,000 pounds of TNT. It was a matter of record that these weapons were supplied to Israel by the United States in 2010. Each bomb had the capacity to demolish an area 3 times the size of a football stadium. Nuclear weapons were considered, but the implications of the fallout were too severe. The pilots were deployed to level military targets buried beneath the city of Damascus. Given the unprecedented turn of events, the coalition forces did not have the assets necessary to fend off a counterstrike. 15 MOP bombs were launched at strategic locations throughout Damascus. The Israeli response had to be both aggressive and immediate. Israel was not about to form a committee with the United States or the European Union. The exponential growth of anti-Semitism throughout Europe and the United States was beginning to look like Germany before Hitler began his campaign of genocide in the late 1930s. As United States citizens, we of all people should recognize the need for self-defense and the use of aggressive measures. We destroyed 2 heavily populated Japanese cities to protect our borders. To be exact, over 92,000 men, women, and children were killed in the blast. This does not account for the radiation-related deaths that followed the blast. Somehow, the rule of engagement did not apply to God's ancient people or their land. Israel's response was disproportionate. The use of nuclear weapons would have been justified. What you would not hear from conventional news sources was that their Islamic leadership concealed most of their military assets behind civilian targets. This tragic but necessary measure would send a message to the growing conspiracy of evil that was being forged between Russia, China, and the Islamic Brotherhood. Any military action or coercion from the United Nations was completely off the table. The mere suggestion that the United Nations had the right to mandate a peace accord was the equivalent of genocide. The Arab extremist ruling parties of Hamas, Fatah, and Hezbollah had long since verbalized their intent to wipe Israel off the map. Israel, from its inception in 1948, has fought 6 wars against Arab aggression. The Israelis were not about to permit their avowed enemies to attack their land, nor would they return the land Egypt surrendered following their success 6-day war back in 1967. Following the Damascus incident, the United States and the European Union, with the unilateral backing of NATO, brokered a temporary peace accord. Satellite data clearly supported an unprovoked attack against Israel. The growing threat of radical Islam and their access to weapons of mass destruction were a continual threat to the United States and Europe. Without expressing so, the United States and Great Britain welcomed Israel's aggressive response to Syria. The production and export of crude oil would be profoundly compromised if their jihad was successful. The need to launch an attack at Iran would be shelved. Unbeknownst to the leadership in Iran, the West was backing a powerful insurgency movement in Iran. The supporters of this new regime were well funded and fully prepared to dismantle their tyrannical government, compliments of Western tax dollars. Iran knew that it was just a matter of time before President Assad would lose control over his government. As such, he was a willing pawn. The mere proposition of demolishing Israel was irresistible. While Assad was not a practicing Muslim, the concept of offering Israel to Allah would restore his reputation and bolster his failing government. Of course, the press would find some way to demonize Israel for this strike, but what else would you expect from the liberal press? Everything was falling into place, much as anticipated. It was never about Islam, Judaism, or Christianity as a religious belief system. Satan, the god of this world, hated any belief system but his own. No earthly powers were capable of moving the players on the board. These moves had been predicted by the Hebrew prophets thousands of years ago, and this was the end game. Soon, the very presence of God, the Holy Spirit, will cease to restrain evil, and with the removal of God's people, the earth and its inhabitants will find a new religion. The altar call is a simple one. Renounce Jesus Christ and live. Refuse, you die.